Клянусь, при осуществлении полномочий президента Российской Федерации соблюдать и защищать Конституцию Российской Федерации, безопасность и целостность государства.
Vladimir Putin has been in power in Russia for 23 years. That's more than Soviet General Secretaries Nikita Khrushchev and Leonid Brezhnev, and a little less than Joseph Stalin. According to the new Russian constitution, Putin can rule until 2036 and could overtake almost every Russian Tsar and emperor in his time in power.
Сегодня, 31 декабря 1999 года, первый президент России принял решение уйти в отставку. Он просил меня обратиться к стране. Сегодня на меня возложена обязанность главы государства.
A little-known KGB agent and personal assistant to the governor of St. Petersburg, Vladimir Putin received power in the most classic of monarchical traditions, through inheritance. The family, as the entourage of Russia's first president, Boris Yeltsin was known as, decided to hand over the presidency to Putin. In just a year and a half, he quickly moved from deputy prime minister to acting prime minister, which in Russia is the deputy head of state, to acting president following Yeltsin's resignation, to the elected leader of the country.
One way or another, the entire media space worked according to the same rules, and the rules were as follows. Putin is above the fray. Putin is at work. Putin has no time to fool around with things like an election campaign. He has a war going on in the country, and he is protecting the people from potential threats. Silent, concentrated, immersed in the everyday concerns and problems of the people of the country. A young man on the farm, as the team that made Putin used to say. He's working on the farm for us.
In the 2000 election, Putin won 53% of the vote, the lowest winning count in the history of Russian presidential elections. Over the next 4 years, as oil prices rose, so did the standard of living in Russia, and consequently, the president's approval ratings. This allowed him to easily brush aside his political opponents.
Масштабы коррупции в России, оцениваемые экспертами 4 организаций, приблизительно одинаковые, в районе 30 миллиардов оценивается долларов. Это 10-12% ВВП.
Putin first took control of NTV, the largest independent television channel, and put oligarch Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who dared to criticize the Kremlin, in prison. Neither event was met with massive protest. Putin won the next election with a much more convincing 71% of the vote. The OSCE Election Observation Commission assessed this vote as not entirely democratic. The principles necessary for the conduction of normal democratic elections were not adequately reflected in the electoral process. The electoral process failed to respect important commitments regarding non-discriminatory treatment of candidates by state media and the principle of secret balloting. Following the 2000 presidential election, administrative tools and obstacles were used to eradicate the most significant and influential media outlets that took an independent or critical line towards the president or the government. Following the closure of 2 independent nationwide broadcast outlets in the last 2 years, the number of media outlets able to offer critical and independent coverage of events has sharply declined. According to the Russian constitution, the same person cannot hold the office of President of the Russian Federation for more than 2 consecutive terms. This term limit forced Putin to look for a successor in 2008. The successful candidate was to be Dmitry Medvedev, another former employee of the St. Petersburg mayor's office and the former head of Putin's election campaign headquarters. During Medvedev's reign, Putin took over as prime minister, but there were few doubts about who was truly leading the country. Any remaining doubt was definitely put to bed when, 3 years later, the president and the prime minister performed the so-called chess-style castling maneuver.
Я считаю, что было бы правильно, чтобы съезд поддержал кандидатуру председателя партии Владимира Путина на должность президента страны.
хочу вам высказать слова благодарности за положительную реакцию на предложение баллотироваться мне в качестве президента России. Для меня это огромная честь.
By Putin's third inauguration, the presidential term limit in Russia had been extended. The president was now being elected for a 6-year as opposed to a 4-year term. It is during Putin's third term that domestic repression political assassinations.
Why is it that so many people who were political enemies of Vladimir Putin are attacked?
Но не всегда. А вас что, президентов не убивают?
Not always. Well, haven't presidents been killed in the United States?
And annexations of foreign territories all became common occurrences in Russia.
После тяжелого, длительного, изнурительного плавания Крым и Севастополь возвращаются в родную гавань.
By 2018, Alexei Navalny had come to prominence as Vladimir Putin's main political opponent. The opposition candidate was not allowed to participate in elections based on a fabricated criminal case. Putin set a new record by winning with a previously unsurpassed 76% of the vote. Russia's unchallenged leader was back in office for a second consecutive term, but Mr. Putin needed to systematically address the issue of time limits on his rule. Valentina Tereshkova, the first woman in space and now a member of the State Duma, suggested that the Russian constitution should be amended to get rid of presidential term limits.
Заложить в законе возможность для действующего президента вновь избираться на эту должность.
Putin presumably supported the idea. These amendments were then approved in a popular referendum in which independent observers recorded the highest level of electoral fraud in modern Russian history. Formally democratic procedures in Russia are preserved, and the country will hold the next presidential election in 6 months. Putin has not officially announced his candidacy. However, there is no doubt that Russia's permanent head of state will remain in power as long as possible.